Hello. Hear you? Okay. Can anyone hear me now? No?
It's not on.
It's not working. Hello? Can you hear me now?
I had to turn it up a little.
Okay. Okay, so what we were getting to was some of the opportunities that I had that arose from my research as an MA student in the history department at USC. I primarily focus on women in ancient Greece. Specifically, I focus on ancient Corinthian women. So this right here is ancient Corinth. We have on the top the two pictures of the temple. That is the Temple of Poseidon. That's the only temple at ancient Corinth today. It's from, I believe, the 5th or 6th century BCE. And that's one of the few Greek archaeological remains that are in Corinth today. In the middle of those is a picture of Acrocorinth. And then below that, I have a sort of panoramic view of the Gulf of Corinth. So below all those little tiny houses and stuff is where modern Corinth is today. Which they moved there a couple centuries ago due to a bunch of earthquakes that were happening in ancient Corinth. So the reason, of course, I went to ancient Corinth was because the sanctuary that I studied is located right at the base of Acrocorinth. And there's also an American school that is located at Corinth. They have one of their bases there. It's the American School of Classical Studies. Their main base is in Athens, but they have a mini branch that is in Corinth where they excavate every summer. So over the summer, I spent May, June, and July in ancient Corinth. And during May, I had the opportunity to excavate with the school at a early to late Roman site that was right below the theater that is in ancient Corinth, which I'll point out on a map later in slides. And then for the last 2 of those months, I volunteered or I interned at the Archaeological Museum of Ancient Corinth. And there I had the opportunity to work directly with
I can't open it.
with these sanctuaries collections. So my research looking at women within the sanctuary and within the broader region of Corinth itself, I primarily use pottery to kind of be able to tell, to diverge what the women's experience was during the archaic and classical period, which would have been from the 7th, my time period, which would be from the 7th to the 5th century BCE. So some of the things I looked at the museum would be pyxides, which are little jewelry boxes, proton heads, which are little heads of women that are attached to pottery. I looked at lichnas, which we will see later on in this presentation. And then I looked at some iconography scenes, pottery scenes of what is called the Frauenfest scene, which is essentially a chain of dancing women, which was mostly created and manufactured in the 7th and 6th centuries. So to move on, I'll talk about some more of my travels and experiences before we get into ancient women. Okay. Oh. Okay. So I have some more. Okay. So this is another view of ancient Corinth. I have a couple of videos. See if they'll play. This first one is just a group of sheep, a herd of sheep that was crossing. And you kind of get a look at what ancient Corinth looks like today. It's just a little tiny village on the slopes of Acrocorinth. See a bunch of little sheep. And there's some men riding on horses that were leading them down. Or not horses, they're riding motorcycles. Leading them down. And then, of course, in the middle, we have the Greek gyro, which is primarily what my diet consisted of while I was in Greece. And then in that, we have the routine sauce, which the Greeks just put it on everything. It's like mayonnaise or ranch to the Greeks. So I love that stuff. I would do that. And then this last video is a video of Lechion Road, which is in the ancient Roman Forum. And it's a Roman road, but it's from, I believe, the first to third century CE. So it's very old. And then we get a shot of Acrocorinth in the back, and you kind of get to see some of the other Roman ruins that are around there too. So, and of course, we got to walk on the road, which is really cool. Being able to walk on a road that's over 1,000 years old. Next, I also got to witness some wildfires that were going on in Greece. I'm sure you guys have all heard that Greece is very popular with the fires during the summer. This was one that happened on Acrocorinth, right on the kind of outskirts of it. That was kind of leading up there. It was kind of a wild experience when I saw it first. So I thought that was pretty concerning when I saw it. Didn't want to get up to the ruins that were on the top of that mountain. And then some other places that I thought I would kind of highlight. This is one of my favorite temples in Greece. It's the Temple of Poseidon at Sounia. It's about an hour's drive away from Athens. And as you can see from that little far away view up in the upper left corner, the temple is pretty much situated on top of a cliff. So it overlooks the sea. You can see the little islands in the background. It's like you're looking up over the cliff. The Greeks were really, the ancient Greeks, they were really big fans of placing temples, sanctuaries, statues in these geographical places that could be described as, wonders to the ancient Greeks. They're very beautiful places. And of course, it made sense that they would place a temple of Poseidon here. It's kind of the perfect place for him since he's the god of the sea. And then I have here the Canal of Corinth. This was a very cool sight to see, simply because this canal was really only constructed in the last couple of centuries, but the Greeks have been trying to create something like this since the 7th century BCE. They were only able to do it in the past couple. And of course, I got the chance to bungee jump into the canal, so that was really fun. That was another one of my highlights while I was in Europe. So very beautiful. And it's also great to be able to stand over the canal because the way to get to Corinth is that you have to take the train. And of course, when you take the train, there's about 1 millisecond where you see the canal and that's it. So it's very nice to be able to stand over it and actually get a full view of what it is. So things. Now we'll move on to ancient Greek women. And then at the very end, I have some more pictures of my travels. I visited, of course, the Athenian Acropolis where the Parthenon is. I visited Mycenae, which is a very old settlement that's over probably 4,000 years old. The Temple of Poseidon, but then I also went to Rome, Italy, and I was able to see the Colosseum and Pantheon too. So I got a little taste of Italian culture as well. But those are at the very end if you have time. So with ancient Greek women, I circled out Corinth just so you guys have an idea of where we're at. But this is essentially a map of Greece, of the Peloponnese. And I thought, yeah. Well, okay, we have another one. Hello. So I thought before dropping you guys into my research, I would kind of visit more of some conceptions that have been taken on ancient Greek women, some of the misconceptions that are very common that arose from early scholarship that look a little bit too closely at ancient sources that wrote about women, not very much in a great light. So one of the first and one of the most common misconceptions of ancient Greek women was that they were isolated from the public and political view. Now, of course, this is partially true because Greek women often did not participate in politics. It was often only men that could participate in politics. And even then, it was men that either owned land or were incredibly wealthy and citizens of that city-state. But at least from the public sphere, ancient authors would have us believe that Greek women were isolated within the domestic household. So their job was purely to look after children and manage the household, and they weren't allowed to visit friends, go to sanctuaries, go to festivals, go to out to dinners like the men could do, or go to marketplaces and stuff like that. The second misconception is the existence of the gynekonitis, which is essentially the women's room in the domestic household. Now, something like this, what it's saying essentially is that women within the household, they were further isolated into a part of the household that was only meant for women. And men themselves often weren't allowed to enter. Of course, within the household, there was likely a place where women did most of their work. You know, they needed a place where they would be able to weave and work on their wool and blankets and everything else that they made. But to say that this is purely the women's quarter and that they're isolated within this has been debunked within the past 21st century. And the last one, which is still kind of in the making of being debunked, is the exclusion of women from agricultural work. So women, as ancient authors, would kind of have us perceive, were only in the domestic household, so why would they be outside helping with agricultural work, right? So we'll move on to some sources, mostly pottery scenes that kind of debunk these misconceptions. So right here, I have a slide on upper class Athenian women. In most of these, as you can see, the two pottery scenes show a woman seated. That is the wealthy Athenian woman that you see, and then surrounding her are her attendants and slaves potentially, although there's no direct way to identify those. And then in the upper right, we have a scene of the symposium. The female symposiists are the only ones present, which is peculiar because symposiums are usually only associated with men. Men were the ones that did the symposiums, which is essentially like a banquet. You go there, you eat dinner, you drink. A lot of the time when the men were hosting these things, the only women that would be present would be prostitutes. It wouldn't be upper class Athenian women because it wouldn't look good for them. You know, that's not what upholding citizen women does, is appear at these things, especially if they're mostly associated with prostitutes. So right here, we can kind of see the idea that is coming into play at the end of the Persian War, which happened at the middle of the 5th century. So by the mid-5th century BC, the Persian War is ending, and the Greek world is entering sort of a golden age. This is when we see all the famous temples and sanctuaries start to get all the really buildings. This is when the Parthenon is built. So we see an influx of wealth throughout most of the Greek world during this time period, which is when we see the idea of this scene of upper class women sort of at leisure. They have the ability to, you know, make their attendants and their slaves do everything. They're able to just kind of lay back and relax. Which is where the idea of women being isolated from the public sphere may rise from. Because it's very much something that the upper class Athenian women would have been able to do. They would have had the resources and the money to not have to go out to the market. They would be able to just send a slave girl. So of course, in this light though, it's not really seen in a negative connotation, because it's a result of wealth and it's something that it seems that the wealthy women are actively partaking in. It doesn't really seem to benefit them badly at this point. Okay. In this next slide, we have some iconography scenes depicting working women and female slaves. Now these scenes directly debunk the idea that women were excluded from the public sphere. Because in these scenes, you can see that women are actively partaking in commercial trade. So in the upper left corner, we see a potter's workshop, and we see a woman sitting down, and she's helping the potter create with the ceramic production. In the bottom middle one, we see a woman that is selling grease. You guys can kind of see that in her hand. She's holding a wreath and she's selling it to the male customer that's in front of her. And then at the upper right-hand corner, we see a washerwoman who's being paid for her services by the man and on the other side of the pot. So scenes like this directly support the idea of women being in commercial trade and women partaking in activities outside of the domestic household. It was something that women of these classes would have had to do because they would not have had the money or the resources like attendance that upper class citizens would have had. And then also the presence of women in the commercial trade in these ancient cities is also supported by dramas, inscriptions, and dedications that name women actively participating in these things. So some plays mention multiple professions, from wreath sellers, bread sellers, washerwomen, spinners, and then of course prostitutes too. And then we have women in agriculture. So these scenes also support the idea that women were doing stuff outside of the domestic household, even if they may have been within just like outside the door or something like that, not completely in the fields working and doing hard manual labor like the men did. Which you can see. So if you look at the left scene, we see a woman feeding animals, which would have been a common responsibility that women had during this time period. And also we see the two scenes in the middle, those are orchard scenes. So we see women picking fruit. Now, of course, this could have been a responsibility of theirs. This is also symbolic of rituals dealing with fertility. And women picking a fruit is essentially, calling on the idea of female fertility as well. And then in the upper right-hand scene, we have a picture of a man on a plow with an ox or a bull. So we see this division of labor. Women are seen in the sedentary position, they're unmoving, sitting, they're able to do most of their jobs in this position, whereas the men are moving around, they're a lot more active, and they're taking responsibilities that could be perceived as more difficult, depending on the outlook. So that will lead us into the sanctuary that I am currently studying. We're going to skip that. So this is the sanctuary of Demeter and Kore at the bottom of Acrocorinth. So I have a little map of ancient Corinth right now that you guys can see. We have Lechion, which is the ancient port that was over there. We got the North Cemetery. We got the Temple of Apollo that you guys saw pictures of earlier. And then over here, we have the sanctuary of Demeter. And it's at the bottom of Acrocorinth, where the sanctuary of Aphrodite would have been at. Then I have a little outline of the sanctuary of Demeter. This would have been from the 7th century to about the 5th or 4th century that we're seeing with the dark line. The lower terrace, which is up here, it's kind of confusing, it's the opposite. So this is the slope where this is almost meeting the road. That's right there. So these rooms right here would have been dining rooms, which is where people would have come for ritual dining or during festivals. They would have dined there too. In this middle terrace right here, we have the ritual setting of the sanctuary. So this is where all the rites and sacrifices would have been done. And then up top here, we have right here is the ancient theater, which was built during the 5th century, which is where they would have hosted plays and such. And then these three, I can't really see them very clearly, but these are three Roman temples that were built later on the site once it was refounded after Corinth was sacked in the 2nd century. So these dining rooms are actually very peculiar for the sanctuary because there is, they've excavated 35 so far in the original excavations that happened in the 60s and 70s. Later on, they found a couple more dining rooms that were way down here in the 90s. Now, one of the reasons I went to ancient Corinth was because the main scholar on the sanctuary, Nancy Bookedies, normally does her research there during the summer, so I was able to meet with her and talk to her a lot. And she estimated that there's closer to probably 80 to 90 dining rooms that are situated on the hill. And of course, the majority of them haven't been excavated. But it's very peculiar because this is the only sanctuary in all of the Greek world that has this many dining rooms. So obviously, the dining culture within Corinth was a very big influence. It was very important to ancient Corinthians. And this is the only sanctuary in ancient Corinth that has dining rooms of this volume. Most other sanctuaries within Corinth and also in other places as well will have a huge dining hall that will fit up to 200 people, but they won't have these individual rooms.
What does it mean by sanctuary?
That's what I was.
Sanctuary?
Yeah, sanctuary. I mean, was this their house? Was this a church? Was this?
You could kind of view it as a church. It would be held in that same regard. It was a place of worship.
Okay.
It'd be like a place of pilgrimage.
Yeah.
That's where you would go if you were wanting to honor Demeter.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. So. Okay. So I have some photos for you guys and a little video. So these two photos right here, and there's a little video too, is of the dining rooms that were later excavated in the 90s. And then before that, I'll show you a little video of what the sanctuary looks like today. So that is the sanctuary right there. it is completely overgrown right now, so, which makes sense, it was excavated, over 40, 50 years ago. And it hasn't been, touched essentially since, besides, these right here. The dining rooms are, like 10 to 20 feet below where the sanctuary sits. Video. So those are the dining rooms, that were left uncovered by the excavation team, and we have a view of ancient Corinth. Of ancient Corinth and modern Corinth out in the distance. So as you guys can see, like the Temple of Poseidon, that's placed on a very high cliff and it's very beautiful scenery. Demeter's sanctuary was also kind of placed with an amazing view, right? And where you see those houses all today, that's ancient Corinth. But further down, you probably would have found agricultural land, which would have been a bunch of farms growing wheat or olive trees, which would have made sense. This is a sanctuary of Demeter. And Demeter was the goddess of agriculture. She was the one that gifted agriculture to the ancient Greeks. So she had a lot of power in just that myth alone. So I don't know if you guys know the mythology associated with Demeter. We have Persephone and Hades. Yeah. That is one of the only myths that is associated with Demeter. It's the only one that talks about her. And of course, we have the Homeric hymn that gives the full rendition of the tale. And in that tale, we see Demeter, when Persephone is stolen from her, she withdraws her gift of agriculture from the Greek world. So she essentially puts the Greek world into a drought, and they're unable to grow anything for a year until she's accused by Zeus, who strikes a deal with Hades and returns Persephone for the spring, right? That's why the Greeks have spring. So that just shows one of the powers that she had, the influence that she had in ancient Greece. So I'll move on.
How do we know they were dining rooms?
We know that they were dining rooms just because of the way they're situated. They're very tiny rooms, and also excavators and archaeobiologists, people that study biology and food from the ancient world, they were actually able to find remains of meals that they had within the dining room. So stuff like fish, plant feed, and pigs were found there. That was one of the main things that the ancient Corinthians would eat at the sanctuary were fish and pigs. And pigs, because piglets were associated with Demeter. That was kind of her animal of choice. So that's how we know that the dining rooms, that they were dining rooms, that we had ritual feasting in these areas, of course. And if you look back, at this middle terrace, which is where the ritual sacrifice stuff would have been happening, this is where they would have sacrificed animals here. So they would have sacrificed pigs and stuff. And of course, the gods, they don't want your sacrifice. All they're really, the fumes of the sacrifice is essentially enough for them. That's what they take from that. So then the people would take their sacrifices, cook them, of course, and then bring them down into the dining rooms. And then that's when they would eat their sacrifices. And of course, it wasn't just the animals that they sacrificed. What we're going to look at next shows some of the other stuff that they ate. So this is the lignon. It's a votive object that was dedicated at the sanctuary by anyone that came up there. And it was used in rituals. As you can kind of see with this one up here, there's traces of burning up here. So they likely were burning incense or something of that sort as part of a ritual for this particular votive. So the lignon is essentially the clay model of the winnowing basket. So if you can imagine a little basket, we have the sides right here, we have an opening in the front, and then we have the handles. These are based off of an agricultural tool that was used to separate the grain from the chaff. And it was one of the two ways that the ancient Greeks and other places in the Mediterranean, this is how they separated the grain, was by using this tool. And then another tool was essentially that of a trident. You guys know Poseidon's trident, the 3 prongs. This would have had 5 prongs instead. And what you would have done with this one is you would have taken the shovel, put it into a stack of wheat, throw it up into the air, and then the wind would blow away the chaff, and on the ground, what you would have is the grain. And that was one of the ways that they separated it too. Now, the peculiar thing with these objects is that the lignon was solely used by women. Men did not use them, whereas with the trident-like object, which is seen throwing up in the air to separate the grain, that was solely used by men. So again, we have this ideology present where women are stuck, or they have jobs that are mostly sedentary, unmoving, they're able to sit while they do all this work, whereas men were doing the more physical labor. But then again, I need to say that this wouldn't have been exhausting either, because for the lignon, there's a certain technique that you need to be able to shuffle around the grain to separate it. And when you're doing that, for an hour, it definitely would exhaust your hands, your arms. So the other thing with the lignon, this is the most recent chapter in my thesis, this is what I most recently studied, is the fact that at the sanctuary, they uncovered more than 500 lignas there. This is the biggest amount that they've uncovered in a sanctuary in the Greek world as of today. So it shows that the Corinthians really favored this method of grain separation, and it shows that women were present within the agricultural responsibilities of the household. And of course, Corinth was, or Demeter Sanctuary was surrounded by agricultural land, would have been surrounded by agricultural land. So it kind of suggests that this was one of the main uses of the Corinthians in that area. They would have used this as a main use to separate chaff from grain. And then also it shows, like I just said, that women were part of the agricultural responsibilities, even if this was only keeping with that ideology that women were very sedentary in their tasks when they were doing this stuff. And then, as you can see on one of them, the one on the left, all those objects that are on top there, those are little cakes. They're often used in these dedications and are often used in rituals. So this is some of the stuff that the ancient Greeks would have eaten during festivals and stuff after the sacrifices were done. And today, I made you the little sesame cookie, which is actually one of the objects that they would have offered and sacrificed, and what they would have eaten at the sanctuary back in the 6th and 5th century BCE. So a really long time ago. And those would have been this big mound in the middle, and then potentially these little things right here. You can see the sort of incisions that are in there. Those could have been sesame seeds. So yeah. And then this one right here, of course, is a miniature version of the ligna. It's the size of your finger, essentially. It's handmade, so someone just essentially pressed their finger into a piece of clay. They made it like this, and of course, you see the brown line. this is imitating, directly imitating, the prototype, the winnowing basket. So this is where we see how we know that this, clay model is essentially from that agricultural tool. Let's see. I think that was essentially all I had. And I think I accidentally uploaded the wrong PowerPoint. Oh, wait, no, I didn't. Okay. So these are some of my other travels that I did. So this is the Pantheon in Italy. Really big building. You can also see a replica of this in Paris too. I also saw that one this past year. I will say that the Italian one is a lot better. And then up here on the left, we have the sanctuary at Delphi, which I don't know if anyone has heard of the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi. Yeah, it's a very famous sanctuary. It had the famous oracle of Delphi, where people all over the Mediterranean would have come to hear potentially their futures told by the oracle. And one of the interesting things is right here, this is the temple of Apollo, where the oracle would have been at. And underneath there are these little caves, they're gas chambers. So the oracle was actually quite literally high when she was telling people, their destinies. So it was a very important sanctuary. We have buildings that are called treasuries, which is where individual city-states would have kept some of their money that is dedicated to sanctuaries. There's multiple ones that are lining up the road that leads up to this temple. It's a very beautiful place. And of course, you can see the valley in the background. It's in the middle of this mountainous valley. So it's gorgeous. And then down here, I have the Colosseum, which was very cool. It's a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. One of the highlights of my trip to Italy was the fact that they had all these archaeological remains that were just this big. Greece, I mean, they have a few archaeological remains that are really big, like the Parthenon, that's a huge temple, but nothing really to this size. So that was a very interesting experience. And of course, I had to go to the Cyclades while I was in Greece. And this is, this right here is a picture of Naxos, which is an island. And we see that typical kind of Cycladic housing exterior development that looked like this. It's very picturesque. The rest of the Greek world does not look like this. It's only the islands that have this sort of picturesque style. So I think that is it for my presentation. So if you have any questions, that'd be great. Okay. So did both men and women participate in the sacrifice and subsequent dining eating? So the problem with Corinth is that there is no literature to back up anything that is in Corinth. Most of the evidence that we come from are archaeological remains, which makes questions like this a little bit difficult to answer just because there's no ancient sources that are directly saying this. But of course, we have other sanctuaries of Demeter throughout the Greek world. We have the very famous one, Eleusis or Eleusis, that is outside of Athens. And that one does show signs that there was, that men and women did both participate in sacrifice. And it also depended on the festival that was going on at that time. There were festivals that were exclusive, that exclusively only accessed or allowed for women. So a festival like the Thesmophoria, which essentially happened over a course of 3 days and was something that was worshipped for agricultural and female fertility. This was a festival that had only access to women. So only women were allowed within the sanctuary, during this time period. And of course, they would have been allowed to sacrifice animals and also to cook and eat in the dining room. So yes, that's true on both accounts. So then, did women get any education? That really depends on the location, on the city that you're looking at. For Athens, the answer is no, they did not get any education. Primarily because Athens was known for being more conservative in their treatment and view of women. The idea that women were excluded from the public and political spheres, that is where it comes from. It's from Athenian sources presenting this ideology. But in other places, say like Sparta, there is a chance that women did actually get education, and that was purely for the fact that the Spartans believed that an educated woman made a woman more fierce and more likely to be successful in childbirth too. So in Sparta, when children aged to the year 7, the boys were taken out of their homes and they were put into a military school. And that's where they remained up until their graduation. And later on too, they stayed within that military school and those military camps for the majority of their lives. Whereas women, little girls, they were allowed to go to school. So they were allowed to go to this military school and learn fighting and such like that. But they stayed at home with their mothers where they could learn how to manage the household and other things like that too. And of course we have examples of women being educated, being able to write. We have women writers that appear in the 7th century. We have Sappho, she's a very famous poet. And she of course was educated because she was able to write, but of course this is the island of Lesbos, which could have very well had their own educational system that is not the same throughout the Greek world. Is there any truth to the play Lysistrata? I would say that there's some truth to plays that talk about women. A lot of the time when you see these plays, they're kind of making fun of women rather than being entirely truthful, like most male writers were during that time period. But that is where some of the information on women's studies comes from today. It's from these plays like this. Just reading between the lines, right? Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You stay down.